Hello and welcome to Scream Theory. My name is Emil. I'm a doctor of physical therapy. I have a bachelor's of science degree in the field of athletic training, but most importantly, I've been practicing metal vocals for 13 years. Just like I did with my false chord screaming exercise program, this is going to be a fry screaming exercise program to help someone go from beginner to master with fry screaming. Now, this program will consist of 3 phases, with each phase helping you to develop specific skills that are going to make learning to fry scream a lot easier. So many people struggle learning to fry scream, and from what I've seen, mostly it's people who don't really have much experience doing vocals all of a sudden decide that they want to learn how to fry scream. Now, fry screaming is a very complex vocal technique, and it requires a lot of foundational skills in order to learn properly and safely and develop a voice that you really are proud of. But so many people try to learn to fry scream without first really even mastering their own voice. And phase 1 of this program is like we're not even touching fry screams, we're just focusing on developing those foundational skills. And truly, this is not something that you can learn to do in a week or even a month or even a few months. It's going to take a lot of time if you really want to develop a voice that you are proud of and that other people will enjoy listening to. Now, there are people out there who would disagree and say that fry screaming actually isn't all that complex and that you can learn to do it in just a few weeks. But from what I've seen of people who don't have that experience doing vocals and those foundational skills, who watch a bunch of fry screaming tutorials on YouTube and eventually figure out how to make the basic sound of the fry screaming distortion and then practice and eventually can do like lows, mids, and highs and start fry screaming, well, they tend to run into a few issues later on down the road, such as feeling like their vocal cords fatigue too quickly, or feeling like they can't really develop the type of vocal style they were going for, or feeling like they can only produce a limited set of sounds and effects with the fry scream, but there's other people out there that are doing really cool things with the fry scream that they just can't figure out how to do. And once again, this is why it's so important to first master your own voice. Not only will this make it easier to learn fry screaming, but it will also make your progress come quicker. We spend a few weeks now just developing the basic skills, and eventually, once we can produce the basic fry screaming distortion, it is just a straight upward slope of progress from there. So if you've really been struggling to figure out the fry scream, then please just try the exercises in this series. Practice them wholeheartedly, be patient with it, and I'm confident that by developing these skills, your chance of success is going to be much greater. And at the end of all this, if you feel like you got nowhere and you still haven't really improved or figured anything out or gotten closer to your goal, then all that really means is you might just need to seek out private vocal lessons, either from me or anybody else you choose. It would be very helpful to have someone guide you through it in real time and tell you what you're doing wrong and also tell you what you're doing right. But even in that situation, practicing these exercises will not be a waste of time. Developing these foundational skills will pay off tremendously for any style of vocals that you're trying to learn, whether that be singing, fry screaming, or false chord screaming. Developing these skills makes the difference between someone who learns to scream and sounds decent but isn't really doing anything all that special versus those vocalists that reach that mastery level and they're screaming at such a high level that so many people enjoy listening to them. And any other techniques or different sounds that they try to learn will come so much more easily because they have that solid foundation. So for the rest of this video, I just want to cover some background information on fry screaming, and then I want to talk about what these skills are and why they're important. The next video will begin the phase 1 exercises, but please watch the rest of this one because I believe this information is extremely important for you to be successful. So, first and foremost, what is fry screaming? Well, it is a method of producing vocal distortion by precisely controlling the amount of tension that certain muscles in our vocal cords and in our larynx produce. When muscles contract, you can think of the force of that contraction as tension. And there are muscles that run through the length of each true chord, specifically the vocalis and the thyroarytenoid muscles. And when these muscles contract, they create tension in the true chords, and they shorten the true chords. But we also have the cricothyroid muscles that tilt the thyroid cartilage forward in order to stretch and lengthen the true chords. In order to fry scream, we need to contract all three of these pairs of muscles just the right amount so that they are producing an equal and opposite force. And what this does is it increases the tension in the true chords without changing their length. So if we vibrate the true chords, such as when singing or belting, and we also increase the tension in the true chords, this alters the way they vibrate. And instead of producing frequencies of sound that correspond with one specific note, it produces a bunch of frequencies of sound across the whole spectrum, and this creates the distortion in our voice. Now, there is a small minority of the metal vocals community who believe that fry screaming isn't actually done with the true chords, that it's actually just a different variation of false chord screaming. The problem with that theory is that not only do we have video evidence of Brandon Kennedy's laryngoscopy where he was performing fry screams, and you can clearly see it's his true chords producing the sound, there's no other structure in the larynx moving, but every person who can fry scream and can do it at a very high level of skill and has developed the level of sensory awareness over their voice that they know without a shadow of a doubt they're using their true chords to do this. And we can even sing a clean note with our true chords, and like I said, lightly increase the amount of tension in the true chords, and you can hear how that clean note starts to distort and turns into a fry scream.
Believe everything that I tell you. They will hear the tongue of the vile serpent burst to perfection. Exterminate all of your adversaries. Drag them into the rooms.
So fry screaming is done with the true chords. It just requires you to use your true chords in a very different and unintuitive way. And this is why developing those foundational skills will help you use your true chords in a way that is more conducive to fry screaming. So what are they? Well, in my opinion, there are 4 skills that are the most important. The first skill is proper breathing technique. Now, I know you've probably heard this a million times, but I'm going to go over proper breathing technique with you because I guarantee you probably have not been taught it correctly. The second skill is vocal projection. Vocal projection is the ability to make our voice loud while also reducing the amount of stress on our true chords. The next skill is sensory awareness, and this is huge for fry screaming because we really need to develop a good sense of what we are doing with our true chords. What does it feel like to produce different sounds and do different things? How hard are we contracting the muscles in our true chords? What does it feel like when we do something correctly versus incorrectly? And the fourth skill is motor control, and this feeds back with the sensory awareness skill because the muscles in our larynx that we're trying to control are very, very tiny, and most people cannot differentiate between what it feels like to contract their thyroarytenoid muscle or their cricothyroid muscle or their transverse arytenoid muscle. They're really small, and most people aren't really even aware of what it feels like to use them. So developing that motor control is crucial for fry screaming because it's going to allow us to finally and precisely develop the amount of tension we need in our true chords to produce the fry screaming distortion. Now, just because a person possesses all these skills and is really good at them won't automatically make them able to fry scream. But what it will do is when the time comes for you to try to figure out how to produce the distortion, how to position your true chords to make the right sound, then it's going to be a lot easier. You're going to have much better control over the little variables, and you're going to be able to think more deeply about what you are doing with your true chords. So now I want to talk a little bit more about the first 2 skills, the proper breathing technique and the vocal projection. Now, with proper breathing technique, all we're really trying to do is control how much air pressure we generate inside of our lungs and how much airflow we push through the trachea and then through the larynx. But the average person tends to inhale into the top half of their lungs, and when the top half of the lungs expand, it pushes against the chest wall. And this is not good because there are a lot of elastic structures in our chest walls. The intercostal muscles, which are the muscles that span between each rib, are somewhat elastic. The ligaments that connect the rib cage to the spine are somewhat elastic. And even the costal cartilage that connects our rib cage to the sternum is somewhat elastic. So when these structures get put on stretch, they want to recoil and snap back to their shortened position. And this increases the air pressure inside of our lungs. So imagine inflating a balloon. As that balloon fills with air, it gets stretched out, and all the elastic components of that balloon material wants to recoil and snap back to that shortened position of the balloon and push the air out. Imagine this water bottle is your lungs and my fingers are your rib cage. And when we inhale into the top half of the lungs, you get this upward tilting and outward flaring of the rib cage. And so when we expand our chest wall, all it's trying to do is this. You have this constant positive air pressure inside of your lungs because those elastic components are pushing against your lungs, trying to force the air out. And the problem with that is we cannot control how much air pressure those elastic structures generate. And plus, there's always going to be some positive air pressure due to those structures pushing against our lungs. And as a result, the true chords have to work harder. Not only are they going to have to vibrate to produce the noises we're trying to make, but we're going to have to squeeze them shut to hold back that air that's trying to escape. So with proper breathing technique, what we want to do is inhale into the bottom half of our lungs to prevent that expansion of our chest wall. And this is where our diaphragm comes into play. Now, the diaphragm only inhales, so the phrase push with your diaphragm is completely incorrect. The diaphragm is a dome-shaped muscle that separates the thoracic cavity, where our lungs and heart are located, from the abdominal cavity, where our other internal organs are located. And as the diaphragm contracts, it expands the lungs, allowing air to flow into the lower lobes of our lungs. But as we exhale, it is not actually the diaphragm that pushes the air out. It's our core muscles, our abdominal muscles. These are large muscles that we can develop really good control over. Unlike the elastic structures of our chest wall, where we have really no control over how hard those structures will push on our lungs, we can very much control how hard we contract our abdominal muscles and our core muscles to push out exactly the amount of air we need, to generate exactly the amount of air pressure we need to produce any given sound or any given vocal effect. So rather than having something like this going on, instead, we can have something like this. Where we can very easily control how much air we're pushing out and the rate of flow that air leaves our lungs. And this is a lot less stressful on our true chords because they're not going to have to contract and squeeze together to hold that air back. As the diaphragm stays contracted, it is keeping that air inside of your lungs. Because when the diaphragm contracts and the lungs expand, there is negative pressure in the lungs, so that pulls air in. Once the lungs are filled and the diaphragm remains contracted, then the air pressure in the lungs is equal to the air pressure outside. And when our core muscles contract, that creates the positive air pressure that pushes the air out. And as a result, we can allow our true chords to be more relaxed when we sing and scream. Instead of having to clench to keep that air inside of our lungs, they can stay very relaxed and loose and just be able to kind of flutter in the wind and do whatever you're trying to do with them. So with proper breathing technique, all you really have to do is make sure you are expanding the lower half of your torso and kind of jutting your whole stomach and belly outward, and just make sure that your lungs are not rising and expanding. And with proper breathing technique for exhaling, you should feel your abdominal muscles contracting. And it feels very similar to performing an exercise called a 6-inch killer, or also known as a double straight leg raise. During this exercise, you will feel your lower abdominal muscles contracting to keep your legs elevated off of the ground. And that is exactly what it should feel like when you're pushing the air out. Now, when you inhale and your lungs are filled with air, you won't feel as much core activation because you don't need as much core activation. But as you start to run out of breath, you should feel your core muscles engaging more and more and more. And let's say you're holding out a scream. At the beginning of that scream, you don't have to push super hard, but as you start to run out of your air supply, you should feel those core muscles ramping up and contracting harder and harder to squeeze out those last few milliliters of air. Or if we're trying to scream shorter words in fast and successive bursts, that's when we're going to need like quick and more explosive contractions of our core muscles. And this is the concept of supported airflow. Your exhalations are supported by the contractions of your core muscles to push that air out, so your true cores can remain relaxed and just all they need to do is vibrate and produce noise. They don't have to clench or squeeze to hold any air back. The hard part, though, is learning how forcefully you need to contract your core muscles depending on what you are trying to do, how loud you are trying to be, what vocal effect you're trying to produce, and learning to coordinate those contractions with what you might be doing in your larynx and what you might be doing with your mouth. But proper breathing technique is not that difficult to do as long as you understand it mechanically. Just make sure your chest wall isn't expanding a lot and that you are contracting your core muscles every time you exhale, especially as you reach the end of your air supply. That's when you should be contracting them the most. All right, now let's talk about vocal projection. As I said before, vocal projection is the ability to make your voice get loud and carry well while reducing the amount of work that the laryngeal muscles have to do and reducing the overall stress on the true cords. Vocal projection is a skill that must be practiced and developed. It's going to take a few weeks before you're really able to do it at a high level of skill. If you have experience with singing, maybe you've taken lessons in the past, or you've just been practicing singing for a long time, you probably understand vocal projection. But there's a certain way we need to do it in order for it to translate into screaming at a high level of skill and performing all of our metal vocal techniques safely. You see, typically when the average person tries to get their voice loud, they push more air. And we reflexively squeeze our laryngeal muscles. We engage those muscles more as a way to kind of stabilize the true cords against all that airflow rushing through the larynx. But this instinctive need to squeeze and clench and engage our laryngeal muscles more is actually going to cause quite a few problems down the road. For starters, not projecting our voice properly can contribute to developing a syndrome called muscle tension dysphonia. A lot of singers and even public speakers tend to get MTD, and it is due to over-engaging those laryngeal muscles while singing or speaking because we don't know how to stay relaxed and use the proper mechanics to project our voice and make our voice get loud. And essentially, it causes the laryngeal muscles to lock up and guard and get really tight and stiff, and it can even be painful, and it can take a few days for that guarding or that stiffness and the tightness in the muscles to dissipate. And over-engaging those laryngeal muscles can also interfere with how we scream and reduce that fine motor control we need to figure out the right positioning for fry screaming and to perform it as safely as possible. In order to properly project our voice, first we need supported airflow, so pushing with the abdominal muscles to generate that air pressure. And then while that air rushes through the larynx, we want to try to keep our laryngeal muscles and our true cords as relaxed as possible so that they're just kind of fluttering in the wind and the true cords are just along for the ride. And lastly, we need to have a big, open, wide upper airway, back of our mouth, upper throat area. We want a large cavity for the sound waves to bounce around and amplify outward simply due to the acoustics of how we're shaping everything up here. And you can think about this similarly to how an acoustic guitar works. where there is a large hole in the center of the guitar's body and a large chamber for the sound waves to bounce around and amplify outward. Another thing is that poor posture interferes with our ability to project our voice. If we have a forward head posture with rounded shoulders like this, over time, this causes certain muscles to get tight and other muscles to get weak. And if you put yourself in that forward head posture, you actually won't be able to open your jaw as wide. It will also make it difficult to really open up that space in the back of your mouth and your upper throat to create that large cavity for the sound waves to amplify. So in phase 1 of the program, I'm not only going to provide tons of exercises to work on vocal projection, but also postural correction exercises so that we can stretch the muscles that are tight, strengthen the muscles that are weak, so that we can stand with a nice, tall, upright posture whenever we sing or scream in order to maximize our ability to project our voice. But that is it for this video. You can go ahead and move on to the phase 1 exercises. I hope this information has already been quite useful to you. If you like the way I teach metal vocals and you want to support my channel, please give a thumbs up, leave a comment, subscribe to Scream Theory, and I'll see you all in the next one.